Okay, so let's get started with Substance Painter user interface. So this is the default user interface you're going to see when you open Substance for the very first time. Apart from the robot, that's something I added in after. So Substance user interface consists of four primary things: main menu, toolbar, windows, and the viewport. So main menu is this guy we have right on top, which consists of file, edit, mode, window, viewport, plugins, and help. These are the settings that control Substance as a software globally. We're gonna go over those settings when the time comes. Right now we're just gonna focus on our toolbar, viewport, and the windows, the element that will help us texture our character. So Substance has its toolbar located in three places by default: one on left, one on top, and one on right. The left toolbar consists of the painting tools like brush, eraser, projection, polygon fill, smudge, clone stamp, and our material picker. Down below we have tools that are related to Substance plugin like export to Photoshop, open Substance source, or the autosave feature. So Substance has added a new autosave feature which saves up after every 30 minutes. Before it does that, you're going to see a slider goes down on top of that bell icon, which indicates it's gonna do the action. If you want to cancel that autosave, just click on it and you're good to go. On top, we have a context toolbar which changes its content specific to the primary thing that Substance is using. Like if I have right now, I have my brush selected, which shows me the settings specific to the brush. If I go over to a polygon fill, it's going to show me the settings related to it. On the right, we have a switch to change between our 3D view and our UV view. We have a switch to change from perspective and orthographic. We have one more switch to change from free rotation to constrained rotation. The last thing on this part is a button to switch between Iray renderer and our texturing viewport. On the right, we have a toolbar that consists of all the windows that we have on Substance Painter. By windows, I mean these sections we are seeing right here. So these are the windows in Substance Painter. Substance Painter as a software is pretty customizable. So let's say I want to move any of these windows. All I have to do is just drag and I can move this guy. I can resize it and I can position it anywhere. If I want this to dock on some place specific, I have to move it here till I see a highlight and I have to let it go. So this is docked right here right now. I can detach it again, and if I click on this guy, it's gonna dock it again. And if I close, you're gonna see we have an icon on our toolbar which is basically that window. Let's close it again. Let's close all of it to keep things simple, and we will go over those things one by one and what they do. But before talking about those windows, let's talk about our viewport. Viewport is this document window which consists of our 3D model and our UVs. This is where we will be texturing our characters. So if I want to navigate in my viewport, it's pretty simple, and if you're used to Maya, it's identical to it. So if I hold Alt, right click and drag, it's gonna zoom in and zoom out. If I hold Alt, middle mouse button and drag, it's gonna pan, and Alt, left click will rotate it. If I want to switch between my 3D view and my UV view, I can press F4 and it's switching between my UVs and my 3D. Likewise, I can just go in here and change it from these buttons, or I can use these shortcuts. The UV view has the same navigation control like Alt, right click, zoom in and zoom out. Alt, middle click will pan it. Alt, left click will rotate it. So let's say we rotated it like this and we have lost our orientation which we had. To bring it back, we can rotate it, and if I press shift, it's gonna snap. The same thing we can do to our 3D view is if I rotate and hold shift, it's gonna snap to 90-degree angles. So what if we want to change the default navigation system which we have right here? In order to change that, we have to go to edit, click on settings, and you see we have a window called shortcuts. So these are all the shortcuts that Substance is using, and if you want to change any of those, just click here, enter the command which you want to give it, and you're good to go. Right now I don't want to change it, so let's just revert it back and hit OK. So let's talk about windows, and let's go from bottom to up. So the first thing we have is a log. It's similar to logs in other 3D packages where it provides you with technical information about what's happening in Substance right now and what Substance will be doing. Yellow ones are a bit of a warning, red ones are an error that Substance has. I usually find myself looking more into it when Substance crashes or give me an error to like dissect and find out what's causing it, or just Google it up to find out what the solution is. If I close it, you're going to see we have the same command line right here. It's just a small window which shows the last log information which we had right here. If I close it, we have this guy again. On top of that, we have our history. So instead of hitting Ctrl Z over and over again, this panel saves all of our history, and you can just revert it back to this section and continue from there. On top of history, we have our shader settings. So shader, if you don't know, and if I have to put it in simple words, shader is basically some commands that tell our rendering engine how light is going to react to our surface. So the commonly used shader in Substance Painter is PBR Metal Rough, and we are going to use it for most of our cases. So if I want to change it, all I have to do is click here, and I have these selections to pick from. Let's just keep it at PBR Metal Rough for now. Under instance name, you can rename it if you want. Restore defaults will revert back any settings you have made right here to the default one. So under shader parameters, we have our common parameters, which consist of AO intensity. It's telling the engine how much AO is being multiplied to our shader. So if you focus right here, you can see if I change this, it's changing the AO value. The quality changes the quality of the reflection which we are getting. So ultra versus low has the obvious tell that ultra gives us better reflections. This thing kind of gets a bit heavy on your GPU, so it's a good idea to keep it at low or medium when you're texturing it. Horizon fading changes your specular around the Fresnel. Let's keep it at default for now. Emissive intensity changes the intensity of your emissive material, like how much it's emitting the light. Parallax occlusion mapping, if we have any. Subsurface scattering parameters is something new they have added. It's basically subsurface scattering inside Substance. We're going to talk more about this in skin texturing part. Do keep in mind these settings are specific to Substance shader right here. So let's say if I increase the emissive intensity, and if I export my materials for a different rendering package, it's not going to be the same intensity. If you want to change it in your textures, not here. These are only changing how we are seeing things inside Substance. Then on top of our shader settings, we have our display settings. So display setting is divided into three parts: environment, camera, and the viewport. But before that, you see there's one more setting called view mode. If I click here, I have these options to pick from. This will change what we are seeing in our viewport. So right now we are seeing a material which is showing us our material constructed with the lights. If I click on base color, it's only going to show us our base color. If I click on metallic, it's showing us our metal map. And if I pick on roughness, it's showing us our roughness map. Let's keep it at material. If you see right here, we have a same menu, which is going to do the same thing as this one. We're going to use shortcut to change it, so there's no point having a window. If you prefer window, it's right over here. So the environment settings. Substance lights its model using an HDRI map. So if I click on my environment map right here, I have these maps to choose from, and if I click on something else, it's going to light my character differently. Down below we have our environment opacity, which describe how opaque our environment is. It's not doing anything because we have our environment blur to 100%. So if I drag this down, we can see in the background our environment, and if I change my environment opacity now, you can see it's changing the opacity of our environment. These two sliders are only changing the background information, but these two sliders will actually control how light is being affected. So environment exposure, as the name suggests, it will control the exposure of our environment, like how intense the light is and how less intense it is. Environment rotation will rotate our HDRI so we can have different lightings. So what if I don't want to come all the way over here to rotate my lights? You can just go to your viewport, hold shift, right click and drag to rotate your HDRI. It's doing the same thing as this slider. So I inverted back to the HDRI I had before. Now if we scroll down, we see we have shadows. So if I disable my shadows, you see all the shadows are gone. If I enable it, it's going to bring our shadows back. Computation mode describe how the shadows are being calculated. The more intensive, the more expensive it is. The more lightweight, the lighter it is on our GPU. The shadow opacity just changes the opacity of the shadow. Shadow is one more thing that's a bit expensive on your GPU, and we don't want to use shadows while we are texturing it because it can change the look of our texture while we are doing it. So if you're not presenting your model or showcasing it, just disable the shadows, and that's how we are going to texture it. So let's talk about our cameras now. So the first settings which we have is field of view and focal length. These are going to change your perspective. So let's say if you have any camera settings from a 3D package, and if you know the field of view or focal length, you can just put in those values and hit enter to start texturing if you want to have a specific camera angle. Down below we have focus distance and aperture, which right now is grayed out. Reason being, we need a depth of field post effect to be active in order to use it. So down below you see active post effects. These are some post processing that the camera will do in our viewport, like color correction, depth of field, tone mapping, glare and vignette. So if I enable vignette, you can see it's affecting our viewport. If I enable depth of field, you see our focus distance and aperture has become visible again. If I change the settings to get a depth of field effects, I can get that. So let's disable it for now. Let's just keep a vignette effect. You have lens distortion, which is going to distort your lens as the name suggests. You're not going to use it. If you find any reason to use it, just it's right here. Down below we have activate temporal anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing basically just makes your model smoother and much more better looking in your viewport. The higher the value, the cleaner your model looks. This is one more thing that's heavy on your GPU, so keep in mind if you want to use it. Activate subsurface scattering is basically a switch that's going to enable the subsurface scattering we talked about here in our shader. So if you have it disabled, you're not going to see any subsurface effect. Activate color profile. So if I have to describe this, it's kind of like an Instagram filter. So if I click on my profile and pick any of these, see how it's changing the effect of our viewport. One more thing that we might never use, but if you want, you know where it is. So let's disable it and scroll down. So the viewport settings, most of these we might not want to change it. The only thing we want to mess with is a show wireframe. So if you enable it, you can see your wireframe. You can change the color of your wireframe right here. You can change the opacity of wireframe here. So that's it for our display setting. Now let's talk about our shelf. Let's undock it, move it down here and scale it up. Nope. Okay. So shelf is where we will manage all of the tools and resources we have inside Substance. This kinda is like a folder system inside Substance Painter. So we have our list of folder structures right here. So if I go over to brush, it's going to show me all the brushes which we have. If I go to alpha, it's going to show me alphas. If I go to material, it's going to show me materials. If I want to have a separate window for my materials or my brushes, I can just click on it, right click, create a sub shelf, and it's going to give me a small shelf, and I can drag this and have a separate window of its own and move it to my second monitor if I want. If I want to search something specific in my shelf, I can just click here and let's type in maybe paint. So it's going to show me every brush that has paint on its name. If I want to do that for all of the things, I just have to go to all and just type in paint again, and it's going to show me everything related to paint. The filter right here filters more of those things which we have, like under project. Under alphas, we can see more alpha according to its folder structure, like clothing, cracks, dirt, fingerprint, fonts, footprints, etc. I just don't like using it much. If I ever need anything, I just go to all and type in those keywords to find my thing. So let's talk about properties now. Properties consist of setting for every specific thing that we have selected on Substance. For example, if I go over to my layer and create a fill layer, it's going to show me setting related to my fill layer. If I create an empty layer and pick my brush, it's going to show me my settings of the brush. If I pick a polygon fill, it's going to show me settings related to it. One thing you might notice is our context toolbar reflects what we have going on in our properties. Like if I pick a brush, it reflects what we have here. If I pick polygon fill, it reflects what we have here. So context toolbar is just an easier way to approach these guys. If you want to access properties window other way, we can just right click on our viewport and we can have access to these settings. To get rid of that, just tap on your viewport and it's gone. Let's talk about our layers now. So since we have it open, layers are basically the same layering system you're used to seeing in other packages like Photoshop. This layer system works a lot closer to Photoshop, and we are going to talk more about these tools in the painting section. Let me just go in and delete these two guys. So last two things which we have is our texture set settings and texture set. So texture set is how we divide our objects inside Substance Painter. So if I click here, I can hide my robot. If I click here, I can hide my water drops. Texture sets are created by assigning material IDs to your objects in a 3D package. And when we import those settings in, Substance will divide those material IDs into different texture lists. You can always rename your texture set list to something else. One thing about dividing texture set list is it may or may not be divided according to your UV layout. What I mean by that is if I go over to my UV, everything right here will be on a same texture set and everything right here will be on its same texture set. It's not always going to be the case, but this is like a ideal way to do it. You can always have a different texture set here and a different texture set for these guys, but you will have to combine them out in a different software like Photoshop, which makes the work more tedious. So let's go back to our 3D mode. With different texture set, as we discussed, you can hide these guys, you can solo it. One more thing which you can do is assign specific shader to each texture set. So right now both of these are using PBR Metal Rough, but let's say I want to use a transparent material for the water drops. So to do that, I have to click here and pick a new shader instance. And now if I go over to my shader section, you see we have one main shader copy. I'm going to pick this and click on a PBR Metal Alpha Blending and give it a name like So now we have one shader for our raindrops and one shader for our robot. So now I can have opacity for my water drops. So if I click here and enable our properties, I can go to my opacity and play with it to get the look I want. So that way we can define our shaders into different texture set. Texture set settings are settings related to each texture set. First thing you can change in your texture set setting is the resolution of your textures. So if I click here and make it 4K, it's going to take some time to calculate. Now you can see our textures are much more sharper and much more detailed. I can switch back to 2K and a 4K. Since most of our materials in Substance are going to be procedural, Substance does a good job at calculating those materials again for 2K or 4K or 512 by 512 and giving you the best possible quality you can have in that specific resolution. Using 4K for every specific texture set is kind of like a dream, but if you have 4K and a lot of layer, it gets super expensive, especially if you have a lot of texture sets. So you might want to reduce it sometime, or sometime you might want to give priorities to hero assets and make them 4K and rest of those 2K. Or sometimes if it's getting too heavy on your machine, we are going to split our project into different scenes. We're going to go over that in coming weeks. But right now, since we have a simple character, let's keep it at 4K. Channels are basically the texture which our shader is using to define how light is being calculated. So it consists of base color, metallic, roughness, normal, height, and emissive for the default PBR material. Not just the emissive, that's something I added in afterwards, but this is what the default shader would look like. If I go over to my viewport and if I hit C, I can switch between those channels which we have right here and see which one is doing what and how does it look. If you remember this, we are basically changing these menu through a shortcut C. If I hit Shift plus C, it's going to switch it backwards. And if I want to go back to my main material, I'm just going to press M. Down below, we have our normal map mixing, which defines how the normal map is being combined with every layers. Let's just keep it at combine for now. Ambient occlusion is grayed out because we don't have any ambient occlusion channel. If I add it, we have access to it, but we are not going to use it. UV padding should be fine by default. Under mesh maps and bake mesh maps, we can bake our textures, which are right here. So these are the textures I have baked from my high poly to my low poly. So these are the maps Substance will use to do its magic. If I go over here and hit B, I can switch between those mesh maps. If I press Shift B, I can scroll it backwards. And if I press M, I can go back to my material. We did this already for an AO channel, but if we want to add more channels, we can just click on the plus and we have these options to pick from. If we want to get rid of one of those, we just have to click on the minus and we are done. Alright, so that was a quick overview about Substance user interface. I personally like my user interface to be default with few minor changes. So if I want to reset my user interface, I can go over to Window and click on Reset UI. One last thing before we wrap this up. If we want to focus on our viewport rather than these extra windows and they get too noisy, you can just hit Tab and it hides your UI and it showcases it.